This is the 7.4 part 2 video answer key. And we're just going to do 3 problems here. The first one I'm going to do is 31. This obviously has a lot of parts. And you can see for 31 that there's an A, B, C, and D. And I see that all of these are going to be sum and difference formulas. And I see that the information I'm given in 31 is that I've got a sine of alpha, and that alpha is between 0 and pi over 2. So right away, before I even start on the next part, this is a quadrant 1 angle, and that sine of alpha was again 3 over 5. So my sine of alpha is 3 over 5. My sine of beta is, oh, this is cosine of beta, sorry, not sine of beta. My cosine of beta is 2 root 5 over 5, and then this falls between negative pi over 2 and 0, so that actually means that this is a quadrant 4 angle. Now I can see that I'm going to need to know my sine of alpha plus beta, cosine alpha plus beta, sine of alpha minus beta, tangent of alpha minus beta. So before I even do that, I'm just going to solve my triangles here. Sine of 3 over 5 in quadrant 1. This one's very straightforward. I've done this a million times. 5, opposite 3, 4 for my adjacent. So we know that right away. We can go ahead and establish, because we're going to need to know all of this in the future, that your cosine of alpha will be 4 over 5, and your tangent of alpha will be 3 over 4 as well. So now I have all my information for alpha. If I look at beta, it's in quadrant 4. I know that theoretically we could break this down a little bit more. We'll call this 5 for my hypotenuse. We will say that my adjacent side is 2 times the square root of 5. So that means I'm looking at 5 squared is equal to 2 times the square root of 5 squared plus opposite squared. So I get 25 is equal to 4 times 5 plus opposite squared. 25 is equal to 20 plus opposite squared. 5 is equal to opposite squared. Well, that means my opposite here is going to be the negative square root of 5. And that would be my opposite side. So now I can go through and say that that means that my sine of beta will be equal to negative root 5 over 5. And then my tangent of beta will be equal to negative root 5 over 2 times the square root of 5. Those will reduce, and I'll be left with the tangent of beta equal to negative 1/2. So that's going to give me all the information I need to know now. Now that I know all 3 of my trig values for the ones that are being given to me that I'll need to know, I'm actually going to go through and start doing this, because now this is just plug and chug. This makes my life 30 times easier to have all this information from the get-go as opposed to waiting and then applying at the end. So for A, I've got the sine of alpha plus beta. And then again, the formula for the sine of alpha plus beta, if you just look one page over at page 460, you'll see that you are talking about the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta plus the cosine of alpha times the sine of beta. So this means we've got the sine of alpha, which is 3/5, times the cosine of beta, which is 2 root 5 over 5, plus the sine of beta, or the cosine of alpha, which is 4 over 5, times the sine of beta, which is negative root 5 over 5. And again, this is plug and chug into that sine of alpha plus beta formula. I end up with 6 root 5 over 5, 25, plus negative 4 square root of 5 over 25. So then this becomes 2 times the square root of 5 over 25. So again, I have to know what's my sine of alpha, my cosine of beta. I went through and solved all of those. I know the sine and cosine of alpha. I know the sine and cosine of beta, and I just plug them into the formula. For part B, I'm looking at the cosine of alpha plus beta. Cosine of alpha plus beta is the cosine of alpha times the cosine of beta minus the sine of alpha times the sine of beta. So here, this means I am looking at 4 over 5 times 2 root 5 over 5 minus 3 over 5 times negative root 5 over 5. This becomes 8 times the square root of 5 over 25 plus 3 times the square root of 5 over 25, and my answer is 11 times the square root of 5 over 25. I know all of my formulas, I know all of my values here, I just plug and I chug. Part C is the sine of alpha times the sine of alpha minus beta. Well, here that is the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta minus the sine of alpha, or minus the cosine of alpha times the sine of beta. So here I know my sine of alpha is 3 over 5. My cosine of beta is 2 root 5 over 5. I'm subtracting my cosine of alpha, which is 4 over 5, multiplied by that cosine of beta, which is negative root 5 over 5. 6 times the square root of 5 over 25. And this becomes addition because I've got this negative negative. So that becomes plus 4 times the square root of 5 over 25, which is 10 times the square root of 5 over 25. And there we go. That's the sine of alpha minus beta. I just have to know what is my sine of alpha, what is my sine of beta, and plug and chug. And then we've got our tangent. Of alpha minus beta, which is equal to the tangent of alpha minus the tangent of beta over 1 plus the tangent of alpha, tangent of beta. Go back up here, I look, my tangent of alpha is 3 over 4, tangent of beta is negative 1/2. So this is going to be equal to 3 over 4 minus negative 1/2 all over 1 plus 3 over 4 times negative 1/2. This is going to be a lot of fraction addition here. So this becomes 3 over 4 plus 2 over 4 all over 1 minus 3 over 8. So that becomes 5 over 4 all over 5 over 8, which is 5 over 4 times 8 over 5. Those 5s cross out, that 4 and that 8 reduce, and my answer here will be 2. So you go through that process of plugging it in, then you just have to simplify and do a lot of fraction addition and some fraction division, and you have your answer there. So that's how you go about doing 31 and 33. 33 is very similar, except it gives you tangent, but still knowing what the tangent is and knowing what quadrant you're in, you should be able to figure out your sines, etc. The other one gives you cosine. You know how to find everything. This is just taking some chapter 6 material and then applying it in with these new formulas, making sure that you're plugging things in the right place. It's easy to make some clerical errors here. It's easy to get bogged down in the tediousness and make a mistake. But as long as you focus and just keep track of your work, it should come a little bit easier than other parts here. Looking at 45 through 57 odd. Again, this is just applying some trig identities with what we already know. We already looked at a lot of these. Let's look at number 45. 45 proves something that's kind of fun. Also, it kind of relates to the extra credit on the quiz that I gave you. I've got the sine of pi over 2 plus theta is equal to the cosine of theta. Well, that's because I've got the sine of pi over 2 times the cosine of theta plus the cosine of pi over 2 times the sine of theta. And the sine of pi over 2 is 1 times the cosine of theta plus the cosine of pi over 2 is 0 times the sine of theta. That goes away. That's just the cosine of theta, and the cosine of theta is equal to the cosine of theta. That checks out. So, cool. Happy with that one. Next one I'll do is number 55, because that one is actually a little bit more extreme, and there's a lot of work there. So, for 55, I've got the sine of alpha plus beta plus the sine of alpha minus beta is just equal to 2 times the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta. This is the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta plus the cosine of alpha times the sine of beta plus the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta minus the cosine of alpha times the sine of beta. Well, that crosses out with that, so I'm just left with 2 times the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta, and of course that's equal to 2 times the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta. I'd actually say that these trig identities are a little bit easier than the ones that you've been given prior, because we know what's going on here. We know these formulas. It's just kind of a plug and chug, and it's kind of a rewriting of the formula and making it all work out. So that's how you go ahead and do the homework. 31 and 33 are really related. 45 through 57 are kind of doing the trig identities. Make sure you know your formulas, and you should be golden. If you have any questions, again, reach out sooner rather than later, and have a great night.